if you allow me, I'm going to speak sitting because, well, I don't know why. I prefer. I am an old-fashioned university teacher, so I don't have any PowerPoint, no images to show. We'll have some music during my lecture, but you have to be content with my simple conversation. Also because before coming, there was a revolt of the technical instruments in my home. My printer didn't work, my computer was revolting against me, and so okay, you have my conversation and the effort to share with you some of the thinkings I have around the question of secular and so on. Seeing the previous presentation, I was thinking of the definition Rudolf Otto gave of the sacred in the 20s of the last century, 1920 or something like that, when he wrote this book on Das Heilige, the sacred, where the sacred was characterized by three adjectives: tremendum, luminosum, fascinans. It was something to be feared, tremendum, something which suggested a sort of background you don't catch completely, luminosum, and fascinans, which nevertheless, or exactly because of that, attracts you very strongly. In many senses, my intervention here is against all that. I'm sorry to disturb. And I was reflecting upon the fact that my being against the sacred is also determined by the fact that I am an Italian. Yeah, because you know that in Italy we live very close, not only to the place where Nietzsche got mad, but also very close to the Vatican. So in many senses, Italians are historically determined by a sort of anti-religious prejudice, because they had to struggle against a very important power, political temporal power, which was in the middle of Italy. So that's a question. But this is not the only reason why I am here talking about secularization and Christianity and so on. As a matter of fact, I still believe that I believe. I still believe that I am a Christian, but I would summarize my attitude in a sentence, in a paradoxical sentence we usually use in Italian: thanks God, I am an atheist. And this is, you can take it as a sort of summary of what I'm going to say, to tell. Because the title I proposed for this little lecture, do you understand me?
Yes.
I'm sorry, because generally when I'm not speaking in an English-speaking country, they understand me better, because the English-speaking people don't understand my English. But as we are speaking a foreign language, we understand each other very well. What I'm saying is that Christianity as secularization, or secularization as Christianity, I don't remember which was the first term. But at any rate, it is the same as saying, thanks God, I am an atheist. My view of Christianity is more or less determined, conditioned by the reading of René Girard. René Girard is a very important French author who is still alive in California, pretty much older than I, but very very lebendig, very living still, who elaborated a theory on the sacred which connects it to violence. What is sacred? Sacred is the sacrificial victim, the cibo expiatorio, what is this? The animal which is sacrificed, il capo espiatorio, pardon?
Scapegoat.
Sì, the scapegoat, okay, because sometimes the word escaped me, the scapegoat. The origin of society in Girard's theory is that everybody is pushed by an instinct of imitation of the other one. Girard starts by quoting Aristotle saying that the child learns to live imitating the gestures and the attitudes of the adults. But imitation involves also a sort of rivalry. I want to imitate you, but basically I want to have what you have. And not even because I need it, but because you have it. So this is all the sociologists today speak of the status symbol and so on and so forth. Why should I buy a new car when my old one still works? Because my neighbor has bought another one which is better than mine, and so on and so forth. So this is what at the beginning, the ideal beginning of society, Girard thinks calls the mimetic crisis, the crisis of imitation. Everybody wants what the other one has, in terms exactly because the other one has it. So society at the beginning is a sort of struggle of everybody against everybody. How does this situation give place to a more peaceful group, and when they find a common enemy? A common enemy can be somebody of a group which is not the same than the two struggling ones, because if my enemy is of the group B and I kill him, the group B will kill all people of group A, and so on. So it is like in a football match. The two groups share the same feeling of hostility towards the judge. Arbitro cornuto is a typical Italian expression. Cornuto is in Italian the man who is betrayed by his wife. So arbitro cornuto, arbitro is the judge. So in many senses this is basically the model of the birth of society in René Girard, which was very impressive for me as a Christian, because not only as a Catholic but also as a general Christian, I've been educated in the belief that Jesus is the victim which saves our souls because he is killed for our sins. He is the victim, the victim, the sole victim who can satisfy the need of justice of God the Father. Now, if the victim is the scapegoat, if the meaning of the victim is just to put peace between struggling groups in a sort of ideal original situation of society, how can I call Jesus a victim? This is not just a goat, I mean, he called himself Agnus Dei, but it's not a compliment. to consider him just somebody who came in order to create human society. So I asked Girard, how this theory works with Christianity? And he says me simply, Jesus was not a victim. He was killed because he came to show to humanity that the victimary logic is not the good one. There are passages in the Gospels where Jesus says it is not by the blood of scapegoats and so on that you satisfy God and so on, but by your inner conversion, love of God, love of the fellow man and so on. So, in many senses, it was for me an important discovery in my personal Christian experience to read Girard and understand that Christianity was not the supreme form of religion of the sacred, but on the contrary, it was the desacralization of what had been considered sacred for so much time, so long a time. Humanity, the scapegoat is a natural history of religiosity as a factor, as an element of construction of society. But this is not exactly what is religion for us in the Christian tradition. The Christian tradition is, on the contrary, the revelation of the original violent nature of the sacred and the overcoming of that attitude towards the sacred. In my personal Catholic history, the victimary logic of the Christian Catholic tradition was a sort of stone of scandal. Why should I consider, for instance, God as somebody who wants to send me to the hell for eternity because of my small or big sins? I don't know how big sins I have. Unfortunately, I can no longer commit many sins. But okay. But this was exactly a point, of course. Now, how do you really consider God as a strong master who wants you to obey, and then if you don't obey, he punishes you, and so on and so on? All this maybe was the God of the Old Testament, as we Christians used to say, but I always, well, I don't know if I touch on a difficult point. For instance, I am very respectful for the Jewish tradition, of course, and if the Ancient Testament were not there, there would be no New Testament, by the way. Okay, but sometimes I have the impression that the politics of Israel today is a sort of Ancient Testament politics. Strong revenges against Palestinians. If one Palestinian kills an Israeli, all the neighborhood is destroyed. This is what sort of Old Testament politics. Okay, but I don't know. It's true that. It is true. Don't forget that Novalis, a great German poet, used to say that the Catholic Church had been very wise not to allow the believers to read the Ancient Testament. Of course, it is not completely true, because it was never prohibited to read the Ancient Testament for Catholics, but it was not so. Myself, I don't know very well the Old Testament. I remember but because I don't like much of it. All the history of people going around, struggling, conquering a territory, and so on and so forth. And Novalis used to say, no, the Catholics may preserve their faith exactly because they don't read the Ancient Testament. So in many senses, for me, the reading of Girard was a sort of revival of my old Christian education. I had so many problems with this God, this justice of God, the predestination, the hell, of course, with all the moral consequences of it, ethical, sexual ethics, and so on and so forth. With the idea that there was also, when I was young, in the Catholic youth organizations, one of the expressions for a person to be respectable is that he has suffered so much. So, as if suffering were a sort of patrimony. Of course, we have to tolerate pains and so on, but why consider it a richness? It's sort of... so, all that was, in my personal experience, renewed by the knowledge of the books by René Girard, and I owe to him a sort of new Christianity in my life, very, very weak, as you will see in the second part of my talk. Just in order to exemplify musically this sort of lightening, in the sense of becoming lighter, not in the sense of blitzen. As a sort of, how do you say lighten, not so heavy, the opposite of heavy? Light. Light. So this sort of taking the sacred less seriously and less tragically, I have suggested to play a couple of gymnopédies by Eric Satie, who was, at the beginning, Eric Satie had been also a sort of pretending mystical person, but at a certain moment he met Jean Cocteau. He started to be a member of a group of, I would call them a little bit frivolous people in Paris at the beginning of the century. And I have this image of Satie, which probably doesn't correspond completely to his personality, but I think it can illustrate a little bit what I'm meaning by desacralization, secularization, and so on. Up to you. Thank you very much for that. Well, it came to my mind while listening to these pieces that Nietzsche, who is a neighbor in Torino, who was a neighbor, used to speak of philosophizing by the hammer, martello. But somebody suggested that this martello, this hammer, was not tan, 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 so the diapason, ting. So that in many senses, my idea of the sin is simply a sort of lack of attention for the nuance. In Italian we have an expression which is interesting because we say che peccato. When one in English would say, what a pity, I missed a gymnopédie, I didn't listen exactly what somebody said. And in my famous important book, Believe, I used to speak of peccato, of the sin, in this sense. The peccato, the sin, is the fact of not catching the voice of the other, of God, vocation, the cry for help of somebody, or what was required in a certain situation, but not in order to satisfy an ideal, a general idea of justice and so on. So simply in order to correspond, to answer, to listen, and this seems to me an interesting way of of developing the meaning of secularization. Jesus came not to show that God is overpowering, is absolutely is transcendent, but to show that it is not so. That God is not this old uncle whose we don't understand the intentions, and we have to be careful because of heritage. If we don't satisfy the old uncle, a little bit bizarre and so on, we are going to lose our patrimony. All this is not the case. Even the idea of transcendence, and in this I am a little bit departing from a large trend in the 20th century theology. You have learned probably more than I in Italy. You have heard of Karl Barth, negative theology, tragic view of Christianity, and so on. I'm not sure. Sometimes they invite me in Copenhagen. I've been invited to give to preach in a church, in a Protestant church in Copenhagen, and I wonder why they are interested in what I say. A group of bishops I know in Denmark, and I realize that as they have been so obsessed by a Kierkegaardian view of religion, a sort of southern lightness, sort of southern frivolity, is a sort of balance for that tragic view of Christianity. So I don't think that insisting on God as a totally other, for instance, this is the very meaning of negative theology, of dialectical theology of the 20s and 30s. I don't think that this is a correct interpretation of Jesus. But of course, Jesus is Jesus. We don't know exactly who he personally, Yehoshua. And then afterwards he became the Christ. And the Christ is not exactly the Jesus, historical Jesus, but this is all what has to do with our personal faith. But surely he was somebody who wanted to live in the middle of the village with other people, going to dinner with prostitutes and publicans. Publicans are people very strongly hated also today because they are the agents of taxes. So the worst people in the world, also for Jews, for the ancient Jews. So he used it not to be the sacred. He was not numinosum, he was not tremendum, he was not fashionable. Well, probably was fashionance. If you read the pages of the Gospel on the rich young, when we met and say, Jesus, having seen him, he loved him. This is nothing to do with the sacred in the Otto sense of the term. So this basis in Girard involves an effort of secularization as authentication of Christianity. The problems I have in Italy with the Catholic hierarchy, with the Catholic Church, with the political presence of the Catholic Church, the political weight of the Catholic tradition in Italy, are all problems of secularization. They have to understand, one has to understand that the more we desacralize the presence of the religious tradition in our society, the more we are going to be faithful to the vocation, the call the gospel involves for us. Even the question is, even in my personal morality, I have tried always to, of course, this is very orthodox people say you create a God and a religion for your own taste. So, okay, à la carte, they say, a religion à la carte. You choose what you prefer. Okay, why not? I mean, by the way, why should I consider that God is always the opposite of what I consider reasonable? Only because, by the way, even this sort of negative dialectic of the faith, as a Catholic, I have always been educated to think that the scandal the Church represents for me is a proof of my faith. I have to tolerate that. I have to accept that the Pope is too rich in order to be similar to Jesus, is too corrupt, because this is a proof of my faith. But why should I consider that God is so the opposite of what I expect him to be, and I expect him to be on the basis of what he said to me in the Gospel? Because this reinforces the authority. Where you don't understand, you have to obey. So, even this sense of the sacred is totally transcendent, ununderstandable, beyond every expectation and so on, as an authoritarian motivation. If you claim to understand, then you have to be persuaded. You don't obey. You obey only when you don't understand, or you accept. You have to humiliate yourself. So, the idea of secularization has deeply to do with all that attitude of the churches, not only of the Catholic Church, but mainly for me as an Italian, that is my Italian prejudice. The authoritarian tradition involves an idea of the sacred which is beyond all limit. Jesus has belied on that. He became a man. There is an important word in St. Paul, the kenosis. Kenosis means the humiliation of God, the lowering of God. God becomes a man, becomes one among us. It is not, there was an heresy in the ancient Christianity which was called docetismo. Docetismo, docetismus was the idea that the humanity of Christ was just an appearance. So, okay, he disguised himself as a man for a while in order to show us that God, but basically he is still the powerful, transcendent, mysterious, fascinans, tremendum God of the ancient Testament. No. The question of this is, of course, a long tradition in European philosophy, also Hegel, of course, because Hegel, in many senses, Hegelian philosophy can be considered a form of secularization of Christianity, of course. The only point in which as a secularizing philosopher, I couldn't agree with Hegel would be that at a certain moment the history is accomplished. But secularization is something which lasts centuries. I mean, secular century. Secularization is never, gets never to an end. You have always to reduce more and more. Why? How could you imagine that God, infinite God and so on, dissolves himself till the end? It is almost impossible. So secularization is always on its way. What we have to do is exactly to identify ourselves with God and God with ourselves. The mistake of Hegel, which was recognized by Kierkegaard and by Feuerbach and by the Hegelian left, was exactly the fact that at the very end, God was there totally, all displayed. Stalin was a sort of consequence of this, of an imperfect secularization, because when the revolution has taken place, then no revolution more. So if the secularization is accomplished, well, okay. If you come and you say that you want to change the order, either you are a madman to the asylum, or you are an agent of the CIA, and then you go to the Gulag. So in many senses, this idea of an indefinite process of reduction of the sacred to the human measure, and conversely, of the ascension of the human to the divine, is an interesting way also of considering history. Why do I prefer this view of Christianity? Well, first of all, because it corresponds better to my personal religious experience. But on the other side, it corresponds better to my philosophical experience. This idea of secularization, which I elaborated on the basis on Girard's theory, corresponds also to a view of the history of the West, to which I think we belong. What happens in the European Western civilization. What is the meaning of this process? Can we consider it as a sort of progressive adequation of a previously given ideal norm, or anything else? I am a Nietzschean also, not completely mad, but it's never too late. I am a Nietzschean because I share more or less his idea of nihilism as a process through which the solidity, objective solidity of reality, truth, and so on, is progressively dissolved into a sort of intersubjective understanding each other. Take, for instance, the contemporary experimental sciences. Contemporary experimental sciences speak more and more of entities which we will never see. For instance, the black holes, of course. If you see a black hole, you don't see it any longer because you're sucked into the black hole. But all the contemporary physics, like take the boson, the last appearance of course, I believe in the boson. By the way, it seems to be the same as God. The boson is okay. Let's not go too far on this way, but as a matter of fact, contemporary science, or the development of science, experimental science, is less and less experimental, because what is the relation of this table here with the quantum physics? In order to understand this, I should be a quantum physicist. Okay, I should be a member of a community of people who speak the language of the quantum physics. Okay, but the truth of the quantum physics is more and more related to the existence of a community of quantum physicists, and not so much to the fact that there is a quantum there. Okay, take the quantum in your hands. In many senses, this is my nihilistic view of civilization. Also in terms of more visible terms of everyday life. For instance, there is a great sociologist, ethnologist, or sociologist, German, whose name is Norbert Elias. I was making a confusion with Mircea Eliade, who has nothing to do with that. Norbert Elias, who wrote interesting works on the process of civilization, which is for him also a form of what I would call secularization, of reduction of the immediacy of the real present towards a chain of symbolizations. For instance, an important moment of transition in Western civilization for Norbert Elias was the fact that in the Middle Ages, at a certain moment, the traveling knight who was going around to find a woman to marry and so on, and made justice by himself with his sword, decided to become un vassallo, a subject to a sovereign. So when he abandoned the idea of the duel, and he started to go to the tribunals, to the courts, in order to make his reason, his rights real. in this sense, it's the same thing. The process of civilization is a process of reduction of immediacy of the presence. You are an enemy, I kill you. Moment, you are an enemy. Why you are an enemy? Let's go to the courts. Let's file an accusation and so on. Let's have a judgment by a sovereign. Of course, if you think of psychoanalysis, is a form of secularization. Well, I don't know. I want to use any kind of historical facts in our civilization in order to reinforce my thesis. But why are we subjects for psychoanalysts, patients for psychoanalysts? Because we have an unconscious which is a sort of deposit of all what we have removed from the immediacy, and then it is still present in the form of a symbol, a dream, an image, and so on. So, again, probably a non-civilized man would have no unconscious. While the unconscious is what you create by removing the immediacy of your portions and so on. So, if you live in the primitive forest, bellum omnium contra omnium, omnes, you don't have any repression. And it's, of course, this is a sort of ideal and theoretical reconstruction of human civilization, but it is likely. So in many senses, the idea of nihilism in Nietzsche's theory is the same. Now, he says somewhere that, he repeats several times that God is dead. And why, what does he mean by the idea that God is dead? It means that the God of the primitive man is no longer necessary today. There is a verse by Horatius, Diovis omnia plena. At the beginning, all was full of Zeus. So the primitive man, again, idealistically reconstructed. The primitive man hears a thunder, sees a blitz, a lightning, and then says, who is producing this? And he tries to say, abracadabra, please don't let me be destroyed by that. But when Franklin invents the parafulmine, this form of relation to God is no longer necessary. But by the way, Franklin can invent the, what do you call it, parafulmine? Parafulmine, okay. Can do that because he lives in a more or less civilized society in which people don't kill each other exactly because they believe in that God of the lightning. So God was necessary in order to humanize the world, but now it is an excessive hypothesis, says Nietzsche. I'm not sure that the God who is dead in Nietzsche is the same God of Jesus. I always believe it to be a believer, a Nietzschean believer, because the God who died in the sentence of Nietzsche is the God of the lightnings, is the God of the natural God, or even the God of the philosophers, the God as actus purus, the absolute necessity of reality, which was dreamed by Aristotle and so on, of the philosopher. It is not the God of Pascal, of Jesus and so on. So in many senses, but the death of God is the secularizing essence of civilization. Civilization consists in the fact that God is no longer the transcendent, mysterious being, but becomes somebody among us, becomes Jesus in many senses. how do I put together my Christian view of the nihilistic development of civilization with the multitude of cultures today? Because I'm offering a Christian interpretation of civilization. I realize it. If I were speaking in an Indian audience, what would they say about that? I don't know. They will take it as another mythology to be studied and heard too. Is this so important? Is it so important to believe that Christianity is the sole possible mythology to accept? And this is a way of putting together. Secularization involves also a sort of reduction of the claims of absoluteness of truth. If I don't see the quantum, I have to trust the group of physicists who study quantums and so on. If I don't understand even the functioning of the planes I take every day to go to Turku from Italy, I don't understand, but I trust the community of the scientists and the engineers and which comes to that. And by the way, I trust them because generally planes fly. Sometimes they fall down, okay? This is the Italian gesture, apotropaic. But they generally work. So there is no matter of immediate, absolutely evident truth. If this is true of planes, imagine of religions. So that my view of Christianity is also that Jesus was not an absolutist. When he speaks of the love of your fellow man, a fellow, in Italian which we call il prossimo. The prossimo is a neighbor. So the fellow man is something already more rationalistic. The fellow man is a man who has the same nature as you or something. But by the way, is there any reason to love people who are similar to me? If I had to be realistic, I would not love people like me because I know who I am. Be careful, don't trust me too much. So the love of the neighbor is the fact that I spontaneously, more or less spontaneously, prefer to smile than to gridare, to shout. So this is too natural to be true, yes, but again, why should I consider God so different, so transcendent, so strange, so foreign to me? So this idea of secularization involves also an attitude towards the absolute, which is what I call weak thought. Weak. Not like weekend, the thought of the weekend. Weak thought is the idea that philosophy has mainly the task to struggle against the absolutes. This is evidently very far from the claims of a church, like the Catholic Church, of a universal truth of Christianity to be preached to everybody. But what do missionaries do now when they reach the savage people. They are no longer, unfortunately, no. Just a little bit. Missionaries go to a place non-Christianized. What do? They start to teach people that God is one in 3 persons and so on. They open a hospital, a school. They assist people. They realize what charity, caritas, means, and absolutely not, they don't teach truth. If you don't believe that, you go to hell. This is the secularized Christianity, but to accept that to be Christian is also the fact of belonging to an epoch, to a civilization, to a society, and not to be equal to the absolute human being. Also, this is a way of being Christian. When we discussed in Europe whether or not Christianity had to be named in the European Constitution, by the way, this European Constitution doesn't exist at all because many people didn't want it, other people wanted it, but not the same. So, okay, as a European member of Parliament, I don't know who I am. In Italian, you used to say, "You don't know who I am?" Yeah, but I don't know who I am as a European parliamentary member. So, okay, and I was exactly because of Christian respect for the fellow man, atheist, rationalist, Buddhist. I didn't want to put an explicit reference to Christianity in the European Constitution, and I still believe that. We don't have to impose anything to anybody. You could ask, you might ask, yes, but what then you read in the Gospel when they say, go and preach this to all people? Well, you preach this to all people if they want to accept it. Fine. Martyrs were struggling against the power which wanted them to believe in the emperor. Thanks God I am an atheist. Thanks God I am not a Roman believer in the sense of the ancient Roman Empire. So, in many senses, this idea of Christianity as secularization, or secularization as Christianity, has a lot to do, of course, too much to do with my personal philosophical attitude, which is the idea that our main sin is the identification of being with the given, actually given. Because if you believe that the only being is what is there, present to your apprehension, then you never change everything. Philosophy is not the description of what is, but the project of what should, would, could be in relation to our intersubjective relationships. So all the nihilism Nietzsche recognizes or sees in the development of civilization is a sort of transformation of what is an object to what is intersubjective. There is a word in St. Paul where he says that faith and hope will not last beyond this life, because when you see God face to face, and you don't have to believe, you see, and you don't hope anything more because you are already there, but let's not take it too literally. But what lasts is charity, intersubjectivity, is love. This is our idea of a possible end, but not end, a possible ideal telos of life. So, in many senses, the reduction of the objectivity, which is also the meaning of contemporary science, is the only possible end for our action. The reduction of absolute, the reduction of violence, because absoluteness and violence is the same. What do you call violence? And then I stopped. I realized that this is already violence against you. What do you call violence? It's very interesting to look for a philosophical definition of violence, because violence is nothing but absoluteness. For instance, Aristotelically, you would say that a violence is to prevent a being from realizing what is essentially to it. The stone goes down, the fire goes up, human being has the sight in order to see, and you prevent somebody from seeing. Yes, but this idea of violence involves also that I know what is your essence, and I help you to realize it, also against your will. If you remember the myth of the cavern in Plato's Republic, we live in the cavern. We see only shadows on the wall, but one among us at a certain moment turns around and sees that outside there are real objects of which we see only the shadows going up. So he gets out and he says, there are the real things. He comes down to the cabin and says, come with me. I saw them. No, we are very well here. Why should we go? No, but come, please. No, I don't want to go. But please, you don't know what you lose. Then it tries everything to persuade them to go out. And then at the very end, it takes them by the hair and draws them. This is what churches have done every time. They burned heretics because it was for their good, for the sake of their salvation. So, again, what kind of faith can a secularized Christian profess? This is problematic because, as a matter of fact, if you don't believe strongly, why should you act morally with sacrifice? The only thing is not to respect the nature of things themselves, but to respect the other as the image of God. Where is God? In the temple, in the churches? No, he's in the other ones, in the fellow man. So it's a sort of secularized Christianity, which doesn't involve terrible conflicts. I am aware that I do every day what statistically I am foreseen to do. If statistics were not so objectively valid, no industry could produce anything more and so on and so forth, because you have to calculate how many black cars can Ford produce in 1 year. You choose the car in the color you prefer, provided that it's black. So use it to say Henry Ford producing the cars at the beginning of the 20th century. So in many senses I don't feel to be an exceptional being, the only thing I have to be is to imitate Jesus in his openness and so on and so forth. Of course there are struggles. I have to struggle in order to reduce absoluteness, the absoluteness of absolutes. I have to be, the only struggle I can do is not for an absolute, but against absolutes. For what? For freedom love, reciprocal understanding, and so on. I don't know whether this preach on secularization helps anything, but it gives to think in many senses, and I promise I will think it over again and again. Thank you. No repetition, please.
Before we continue with questions from you.
Of course, I forgot, because I am so self-concentrated on my secularization, that I wanted to conclude with a passage of Matteo's Passion, and before it, probably also the third Gymnopédie. Let me just explain you that I had started to think to have Matteo's Passion at the beginning, because it was a sort of showing what serious religiosity was, and then going down to sati, frivolity and so on. But I realized that also to put Bach at the end as a meaning. I can't say all these terrible things that I say only because I believe in the misericordia, in the charity of God, in the friendship of God. I don't believe in it. And that's why I ask Erbarme dich, mein Gott.
Feel free to ask.
First of all, many thanks for your thought-provoking talk. I was wondering, you described the desacralization of religion, or a certain kind of secularization, as a way to what you consider to be the core of genuine Christianity. At the same time, however, as you described towards the beginning of your talk, mimetic rivalry in the Rizarian sense is stronger than ever. In fact, it's a kind of theory of the consumer society, kind of post-industrial capitalist sacred, so to say. So I wonder how you relate this view of religion, this desacralization or secularization, to this kind of fact of the secular society, described very much by mimetic rivalry and the sacred, the connection between sacred and violence in this sense.
If I understood you, my problem is that, my attitude from philosophy and religion to secular life, to politics and social life, is directed by the idea of the reduction of rigidities. So, for instance, in the current economico-political situation, I am in favor of a more and more democratical sharing of economical and political decisions instead of what is going on, which is a sort of claim of rational scientific organization of economy, which involves a sort of belief in the objectivity of political economy, which is, Marx used to teach that political economy is not a natural science, which is important because it's a historical one. There is no, I speak again here as an Italian because we have now in Italy a technical government. What is a technical government? It's the fact that a teacher of economy, an important teacher of economy, was also a European commissioner and so on, has taken the power in the silence of the two struggling parties, left and right. So, what is the authority of that? It seems to be political economy is the science of the dominating powers which directs the collective, the social life, the bankers. We are now in the hand of the bankers. You don't feel that so strongly, probably because you have a better social order. I know that Finland is one of our enemies now. You don't want to pay for our debts. But I don't know. The problem is that it is not our debts. They are the debts of people who have enriched themselves during the past years. So the poor Greece, of course, Greek capitalists were very highly corrupted, but not Greeks. Greek capitalists. So Greek, Italian capitalists are corrupted, and so you have to struggle against that. Now they want us to believe that there is a national collective interest in making sacrifices in order to restore the economical order. I don't believe one word of all that. I think that these people try to, of course, everything works in the world today following Margaret Thatcher's idea that only capitalism can produce richness. And so we are all within that logic. If the banks get ruined, I am ruined, I know. So if you don't want the banks to get ruined, you have to make sacrifices. It is very difficult to judge outside of this mechanism. If I were the first minister in Italy, the president or government, what would I do? Probably exactly the same as Monti is doing. It is the logic of a system which is so strongly connected, which prevents me from making anything else except trying to create obstacles to this development. I feel my task as a politician also only in the fact of not allowing the system to function perfectly towards the destruction of the world to which we are apparently bound. I really, probably I am not a politician. See, of course I am a philosopher engaged in politics, but I don't consider me a real or a strong politician. But I don't see today in the world any other possibilities than limiting the damage of the turbo-capitalism, as they call it, and that's why I feel uneasy with all that. What would I do in Italy today? For instance, we have now that problem in Taranto. A steel plant, the biggest in Europe probably, which produces horrible pollution, cancers going on and so on. And we are confronted with the problem. Have we to close it, or have we to go on dying, having some more possibilities, probabilities of dying? Not all people die immediately, but the percentage of cancers is higher than everywhere else. And this is the question. We are confronted with unsolvable problems which come from the capitalist exploitation of the previous years, because in many other parts of Europe exist steel plants which don't kill so many people as in Taranto, for instance. So the question is that we cannot imagine a linear development which increases resources and increases richness for everybody. when all Chinese people will have a car, we are going to die suffocated by the smoke. Shall we prohibit them to have a car? Absolutely not. Fiat, by the way, could work a little bit more. We really don't know, except trying to limitate the horrible future which is expecting us. Erbarme dich, mein Gott. Please, be back. I don't know. No, I realize what you mean, but it is probably I look more negative than I am. Is it possible? I think that the matter is to rediscover a political participation which involves also a limitation of our claims. But if I decide them, I can tolerate sacrifices in my economic life if I am engaged in a process, not if I am a victim of somebody who decides and say, okay, you don't have to eat any longer meat and so on. So, that's the question. This is a very difficult problem. But I am a Freeman, so teach me how you do to be so economically florid.
Thanks for a wonderful lecture. I'd like to get back to loftier matters. You spent some time talking about tremendum, nominosum and fascinans, and said that perhaps we can do without tremendum and nominosum. I wonder, I seem to think fascinans is in a way a function of the first two, of tremendum and nominosum. How will Christianity be able to go on with the fascinans? Will that be because of the ethical charge?
Yeah, that's interesting. See, if it is not tremendum and luminosum, why should it be fascinans? By the way, I don't have an answer for that. It's a legitimate doubt. I mean, but fascinans is still the utopia of non-absoluteness. This is the problem of Christianity. Why should I love Jesus and God? Not because they are so strong and so mysterious, but because they are so friendly. So in many senses, I am an utopia. By the way, I used to call myself a communist, so I know that. But in Finland, I saw the last Lenin museum in the world, which is in Tampere. So, okay. But Lenin defined communism as electrification plus Soviet, which is a good Christian ideal of society. I mean, the technological development and popular counsels, popular collective direction of. So I am nothing against communism, and I see which ideal can move the masses for the future. The defense of free market. You imagine people going to the streets and saying, we want a free market. We want to be happy, of course. So there must be a political religious ideal to move the participation. What is fascinals? See, I remember a sentence in Walter Benjamin's, who was a German philosopher who died in the 40s, where he says that the revolutionary people I don't remember exactly the quotation, but this is the meaning. Don't have so much in mind the future happiness of their descendants, but the sufferings of their of their previous, of their progenitors. Which is, in the Fascinans, there must be a sort of, I have many doubts about this sentence by Benjamin, because I realize that more than the ideal of something very positive to be realized, there is the idea of a justice to be actualized, a vengeance, more or less, which is not a good spirit, but what determines you to move against something, not towards something. You have to be pressed by a need, by a person, so this is the feeling of justice. I don't know. Probably there is a sort of duality, as in Freud, Eros and Thanatos, death and love, revenge and utopia. Because if you take the content of a utopia is generally the opposite of what you are suffering now. It is not an absolute novelty. So fascinance can be the revolution. I feel that the only fascination I feel is revolution. But of course, it's heavy. I prefer to stay in the cavern.
So, thank you very much, Gianni Vattimo, for your speech. I was wondering one question. I guess we agree that the belief in progress is a grand narrative, right? So I was wondering that if secularization is a grand narrative, this is somehow related to debate between Karl Löwit and Hans Blumenberg in the 60s, I guess. Could you answer this question?
Yeah, I realize what you mean. Well, I think that Blumenberg, with the idea of the Legitimität der Neuzeit and the opposition to Löwit's idea of secularization, is still tempted by a form of foundationalism. I mean, if you, I don't catch any essence. I simply inherit a sort of vocation. I inherit a language, I inherit a culture, and so on, which is not, we cannot be evaluated in relation to something essential. So even the novelty of the Neuzeit in Blumenberg involves a sort of intuition of a positive idea, of a positive essence, which is a danger, well, of course, it's a danger from an Heideggerian point of view, because the main principle I have in philosophy, which is not an absolute principle, is it exactly the fact of not identifying truth with what is, which probably is already a sort of political decision. What happens always, what always happens, don't consider it normal, says Bertolt Brecht, speaking of society, of the functioning of society, capitalism, and so on. So in many senses, I don't want to identify truth with what is actually. And so I don't want to believe in a being which is can be caught by a sight, by an intuition, by a nous in Aristotle's sense and so on, because it would be a way of violence against me. If I saw directly being, there wouldn't be anything more to say. Why is the first principle is violent? Because it prevents you from asking anything. Keep quiet. Don't ask anything more. So there is a sort of, I don't mean that Blumenberg was a foundationalist directly, but he runs the risk to believe in a sort of new foundation. The new foundation is always the danger of a new metaphysics, of a new objective description of reality, of new essence to which you have to adequate yourself no matter what you prefer. Freedom is openness. Openness is the opposite of absoluteness. And freedom is historicity. My teacher in Torino, Luigi Pareson, was a great philosopher with whom I don't agree completely, but said that in what is essential, religion, origins of our life, meaning of life, only mythology can help us, because rationality is always deductibility. I mean, given A follows B and so on and so forth, Spinoza. But if we are free, if we have to explain our freedom, we have to imagine that something happened. But what happened is not exactly what is deductible. What happens, happens. It's not foreseeable, it's not calculable, it's not rational in this sense, demonstrative, apodictic sense. So this also is a way of secularizing. I mean, no rationalism, but historicism. And historicism means I am never at the beginning. I am never the first man. That's why I am Hegelian and not Kantian, by the way, because for Kant, I have always to be as the first one in front of the moral law. Schiller criticized Kant strongly, Hegel, and so on. Well, by the way, that's another. For lunch, you have something to think.
Thank you very much.